West Michigan, and working here with Tina in Portland. We just talked about my journey from 2013 until now, kind of getting into CI, teaching Spanish, how I got to where I am today, tips and tricks, things that I learned along the way, because it didn't start out very good. Okay, so back in 2013, I was teaching Spanish, but I was only teaching a couple classes, and I was teaching in Alaska. So I had a lot of hats I was wearing. I was teaching a lot of science classes, and that took a lot of my focus and a lot of my time. And so Spanish, although it was my major and it's what I wanted to teach, it's why I got into teaching, it took a back burner to the science curriculum, and so I was kind of just pulling things here and there that I could kind of throw at my students, staying like a day ahead of them basically. And we didn't have textbooks, we didn't have a curriculum or anything, so it was basically just how I learned Spanish, which was very grammar oriented. I was making worksheets, I was handing out worksheets and grading all the time, and I knew it wasn't really what I wanted to be doing, but it was kind of, I was just doing what I could, right? I was just trying to stay a day ahead of the kids. And I said, I don't want to keep doing worksheets anymore. I know this isn't how students learn. So I started looking for resources online. So what I found was The Comprehensible Classroom by Martina Bex. And so basically I spent a year stalking her online, and come to find out she actually lived in Alaska, which is crazy. And I eventually got to meet her. I went to the AFLA conference, the Alaska for Language Acquisition conference, and she was there doing a couple workshops, and so I was able to work with her a little bit, and she gave me a lot of good pointers, but I was still really grammar heavy in my classroom. And so eventually, kind of 2014, 2015, I started pulling a couple of her story scripts offline to work in with my students, but it was still not where I wanted to be. It was basically bad Martina. It was like all the things that she wanted for me, and I just wasn't doing any of them properly, okay? I was kind of crashing and burning, so to speak. Every day I was like coming in and I had all this energy and all this excitement, and I would leave the day feeling like kind of like a huge failure, like I was not giving my kids what they needed. I moved to the city and had a whole group of new students, and I really wanted to jump into CI. I was finally teaching Spanish full time, so all of my classes were Spanish. I had all of this time to dedicate just to creating really good lessons, and at the same time I had started my graduate program at Michigan State University. So I was learning a lot about second language acquisition. I was learning a lot about curriculum development. That was kind of my focus for my graduate degree, and so I told my students like straight away, I said, hey guys, we're gonna start this kind of new style of teaching, and I told them it might totally fail, but if it's going to succeed, it's going to be because you guys are buying into this system. Like, you have to be with me on this, and there's gonna be moments where I might have to say, yeah, that didn't work out, like we're just gonna have to start over again tomorrow, and we might stop a lesson right in the middle if I feel like it's not going well, but I want you guys on board, and I wanna try this with you because I'm really excited about it, and it's really new for me, and it's like I'm kind of taking a step out on a limb here. And so my students were really appreciative of that honesty. I think they really wanted to help me, and they saw that I was trying to help them, and so they were on board. And even on days where I was still using Martina's story script, so even on days where I was like, okay guys, there's like an octopus, and it's orange. Is the octopus red or is it orange? And they're looking at me like, you just said it was orange. And I'm like, I know, I did just say it was orange, but I want you to say it's orange. And they're like, it's orange. And I'm like, all right, we're moving on. So it was really uncomfortable at first, and I didn't know really what I was doing, but I was like determined to keep going down this road of like making my classroom more comprehensible. It started kind of with me wanting to use just more Spanish in the classroom, and I think my problem was I didn't have like a set or like a direction to go with that. I was just like, okay, what I did when I was really focusing on science wasn't working, so maybe I just need to do more Spanish. Maybe that's just the key, is just to be in Spanish. Well, when these story scripts started failing and my students weren't really understanding what I was saying, there wasn't really cohesion between the stories. It was like, it felt very segmented, like we're doing this and then the story would end and I'm like, okay, now we're gonna do this totally, completely opposite thing that has nothing to do with what we just talked about. Kids had a hard time like drawing those connections and keeping the language like moving forward. And so I ended up dropping it completely actually, and then I just ended up teaching grammar in Spanish. I thought if I stayed in Spanish, it's still comprehensible. Hola clase, hoy vamos a mirar cómo conjugar los verbos en AR. Clase, recuerdan que los verbos que terminan en AR son súper simples para conjugar. Entonces, mira la carta de pronombres. ¿Recuerdan esta carta de pronombres, las personas o los sujetos que pueden hacer acciones? Bueno, mira, la primera persona aquí, ¿verdad? Yo es singular, nosotros es un grupo, que incluye yo, ¿verdad? Es un grupo de nosotros. La segunda persona es tú y vosotros. Y súper importante clase, ¿verdad? No te olvides que vosotros siempre se usa en España y bueno, en ningún otro lugar vamos a usar vosotros, ¿verdad? Es específicamente para España, ¿no? Y bueno, usted y ustedes es un poco diferente, ¿no? Porque usted y ustedes es más formal, especialmente en España, cuando se usa vosotros es más informal, ¿verdad? Es súper guay, súper padre. Pero en México, en Argentina, en Venezuela, en Ecuador, se usan usted y ustedes para una persona que, pues, cuando quieres dar con respeto, o también una persona súper familiar, siempre usa usted o ustedes. Cuando conjugamos un verbo en AR, hay terminaciones específicamente para los verbos en AR y hay terminaciones para grupos en ER y IR, pero solamente vamos a mirar AR hoy, ¿vale? La primera etapa es, pues, pensar en el verbo y quitar la terminación original. Entonces, mira el verbo o, ¿ok? Mirar, un verbo súper simple, ¿verdad? Sabemos que mirar es así, ¿verdad? Mirar. Y la primera etapa es quitar la terminación original, ¿vale? Vamos a quitarlo. Entonces, it was very boring. The kids were finding success, but they were finding like worksheet success, right? Where they were like able to answer the questions, but they weren't able to use the language in any sort of capacity. So I was still really discouraged, but I wanted to keep going. So I just kept doing some more research. With my graduate degree, I was reading a lot of Stephen Krashen, comprehensible input theory, right? The I+1 theory, and then Meryl Swain's kind of comprehensible output theory. So she talks a lot about how getting students to like speak and producing output. And so I was reading a lot about that and trying to research a little bit more into how to implement that into my classroom. And so this last year, 2018-2019 school year, I moved back to Michigan where I'm still teaching full-time Spanish. But the big difference was over the summer, this past summer, I bought the Big CI book and I bought A Natural Approach to the Year. And these kind of changed my understanding of how CI works. I was able to start doing card talk with my students, starting to get them involved in the language, starting to put grammar aside, in fact, completely getting rid of grammar for a while, and just talking with my kids in a way that they could understand me. I was using a lot of the techniques. So Ben Slavic in the Big CI book talks about circling with balls, which is essentially card talk in A Natural Approach. And my kids absolutely ate that up. Like, they were loving talking about their favorite foods. They thought it was really interesting that my favorite food is pizza, but I don't like pizza sauce. So they were like, what do you mean you don't eat pizza sauce? And so we just ended up talking about our favorite pizzas and our favorite types of food in restaurants and things. And this lasted like 2 weeks without getting stale. Like, they wanted to keep talking about food in restaurants and things. That was a big one that I started using. And then I found that after a while, kids were just really buying into the language. They didn't feel like they were in class. In fact, I asked the kids, so like, what do you feel like you've learned this past 6 weeks? Before we did our assessment cycle, and they're like, well, we don't really do much. We kind of just sit and talk. And then after our assessment week, when they actually like did their first 10-minute quick write, and they were able to kind of talk about their favorite foods, and a lot of them mentioned, like, Miss Meacher's super weird, she doesn't like to eat pizza with sauce. I showed them that at the end of the week, and I was like, look what you guys just did after 6 weeks. You guys have had Spanish literally for only 6 weeks, and this is what you did, and you just told me you didn't learn anything. Like, that's crazy. You guys are crazy. I don't even know if I'm comfortable being in a classroom with you because you guys are all crazy. And you thought I was crazy because I told you at the beginning of the year that this was going to be super fun and you were going to learn Spanish, and you didn't believe me. Now you should believe me. Look at what you guys have been doing. So when I decided to make the switch to CI, originally I had been very upfront with my kids, but I know that like I would have, if I had still been teaching back 2013, 2014 as a new teacher, I would have just like pretended that I knew what I was doing. I would have tried to, I don't want the kids to know that I make mistakes too. I don't want the kids to know that I'm still learning. I'm still like a new teacher and I'm still new to this. So I would have totally pretended with them and just said, all right guys, this is the way we do Spanish. You guys are just gonna sit and you're gonna learn so much. And I know I would have made mistakes, and I feel like it would have scared me away from trying even more new things because I want the kids to think that I know what I'm doing when I really didn't. And so moving to Wasilla, where I was like very honest with the kids and saying like, this is new for me. I don't really know what I'm doing. You guys are gonna have to try this out together. I think that opened a door for the kids to see like I was putting myself out there and like taking risks, and I think they appreciated that. And then moving back to Michigan, I had a whole new group of kids. I had this whole new system of like implementing CI in my classroom. I felt really confident going off of the big CI book and going off of a natty that I knew kind of where to start. I had a direction. So in this case, in this district, I didn't tell the kids that this was new. I just essentially led them to believe that this is the way I've always taught, and so that I could get them to trust me. And I basically told them, like, this is gonna be amazing. And all of my students in the past have always said that they're never gonna learn Spanish. and then by the end of the year, guess what? They were speaking Spanish with me, okay, after year 1. So you guys are gonna do that too. Basically, I lied to them, but it was like for their own good. So they loved it. They laughed at me when I told them that, when I was like, you guys, well, I used one of Tina's phrases, and I basically told them, you guys, I'm a really good teacher. So you need to trust me, and that what I'm doing has research behind it, and I've been studying this for a really long time, and I love what I'm doing, and so you're in good hands. You guys are going to be speaking Spanish by the end of the year. And they bought in, right? They didn't have any reason to doubt me because they didn't know me. I was totally new to the district. None of the other students have ever had me before. And actually, I talked with kids near the end of the semester, and I just kind of like, I like to touch base with them and say, so how's class going? You know, how are you feel like you're learning? Do you feel like, are you enjoying class? Things like that. And one student said, yeah, man, at the beginning of the year, I thought you were going to be really serious. And I was like, I was super nervous that this class is going to be really hard. And now I know you're just kind of like one of us. You're like super chill, and you just like to have a good time. And I was like, cool, don't tell anybody. Like, I need to have this persona next year. You guys can't like spread it around that I'm like a cool teacher. You guys got to like make people think I'm scary. So I hope they're on board with that, because I haven't taught there, for 2 years yet. So we'll see. And so, yeah, essentially that brought me here to Portland to work with Tina and continue like developing my CI strategies and how to implement them in the classroom so that students stay engaged, so that they still feel like they're getting the most out of their language instruction. And you guys, I've seen like really, really great results. Their quick writes, my students' quick writes were amazing. I was astounded. In fact, at the beginning, when I started implementing CI, I had read a natty and I had read CI and thought, that's great, but my kids aren't going to be able to write for like 10 minutes straight. Like, that's just not going to happen after 6 weeks. I don't see that happening with these kids, but you know what? I'm going to give it a try. And after the first 6 weeks, the kids were able to write in complete sentences. They were really short sentences, but they were complete, from beginning to end. Students were able to write about the things we've been talking about in class. So calendar, they were talking about the weather. They talked about things that they liked, like their favorite pizza or their favorite food. So I was amazed at the results after just 6 weeks, and I was totally bought into this this kind of process after that. I was shocked, and it was so rewarding to see, because I had crashed and burned so many times trying to do this the wrong way, so to speak, that getting it right felt so good and felt so rewarding and so encouraging. And my kids are really liking the class. They feel like they're learning after this. They're seeing the progress that they're making. They're able to talk to each other in Spanish about things that they actually care about. And I have another teacher that I work with who is teaching more traditionally, more grammar-based, out of a textbook, and her kids are learning a lot as well. They're just not using the language as much as my students are. And I've had students come in and talk to me and say, yeah, my friend is in this other class, and they're talking about the same stuff, but I tried to ask her in Spanish, like, well, what's your favorite restaurant? And she knew restaurant, but she didn't know what I was asking her. She wasn't able to respond to me.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
As the student had said, that's when I realized, like, wow, we really are learning how to use the language. And that was really rewarding for her as well. And of course, it made me feel great, because I was like, yeah, that's right. It made my life a lot easier. I was, like I said, when I was teaching all this science and I was doing all this curriculum, Spanish really felt like it was taking a lot of my mental capacity to make worksheets. And like I said before, staying a day ahead of my kids was a nightmare. I was staying up super late at night writing worksheets. I was staying up super late at night grading worksheets. And my kids couldn't use Spanish at the end of the year. And it was disheartening. It wasn't sustainable. I couldn't keep doing that. And so what I noticed this year, after just a few months of using CI, is I was excited to go to class every day. I was like invigorated. I didn't feel like I was wasting time doing things that weren't working. And it like freed me to actually have conversations with my kids about things they care about, because I wasn't following a scripted pattern of like, what's your favorite activity to do after school? And a textbook gives like a bunch of options, like skateboarding. Well, there's really not a lot of places to skateboard where I live, and a lot of my kids don't skateboard. So that's not really a useful like verb to be teaching these kids, but they have to learn it anyway if they're learning it out of a textbook. My kids, if I say, what do you like to do after school? Of course, Fortnite. Like, what do kids do anyway after school if it's not Fortnite? So we're able to talk about Fortnite, and I actually bought Fortnite and played Fortnite and figured out the whole deal with Fortnite so that I was able to actually talk to them, and they went crazy when they found out that I was like, well, a really bad builder, because I'm not a teenager and my thumbs don't work the way that theirs do. But they were amazed that like a teacher and a female teacher at that. They thought that was the craziest thing, was like into Fortnite. Not really into Fortnite, but they think I'm into Fortnite, so they are into me. And so my life got a lot easier, and kids are having so much more fun. They're learning. It's like, it's visible. It's like a tangible difference between my first few years of teaching and now. Some things I do notice that are like challenging for me still, because of course I'm still learning a lot about CI, and so I haven't perfected any part of my craft yet. And so I do find that at this point in the semester I'm still going kind of slow. So I'm still working through card talk and it's getting a little stale. I do have new students coming in, so we just did a semester switch, and I lost about half of my students to the other teacher who is a little more traditional, and half of her students came into my room. So I'm trying right now to like meld the two, where I'm not leaving the kids that aren't comfortable with CI in the dust, and I'm not going so slow that I'm boring my former students out of their minds. Like, I want to make it so it's still engaging for my kids, but it's not like way over the heads of my new students. And so I'm having a hard time with that, differentiating basically my instruction so that everybody's kind of on the same page. And another thing that I do have at my school is we have like a Spanish cultures course, which isn't language focused. And so I started throwing in some CI strategies into that course, and I can see how that can be really beneficial. We ended up doing a few cultural like snapshots essentially. So we talked about Mexican Independence Day, we talked about the Day of the Dead, how Mexicans, South Americans, and the Spanish like celebrate Christmas and how it's different from how we celebrate it. And I try to teach that to them in Spanish using CI. And so they get really engaged in that, and they were able to like understand what was going on even though it was completely in Spanish. If I broke at any point and started leaning more in English, I would get kids that would disengage. I feel like maybe they thought that because it was English time, it was like okay to start going back into their old habits of maybe getting out their phones and talking to their neighbors, and I was losing engagement when I stopped speaking to them in Spanish. And also I noticed that students, they didn't feel like they were actually like learning a whole lot about the culture. They felt like they had to work really hard at understanding the language, and so they weren't able to really pick up on the culture. But one benefit from this is after I was done going through that whole cycle of instruction, I asked them in English, hey guys, tell me a little bit about Mexican Independence Day. Like, who was this guy Hidalgo? Like, where was he? Why did he do this? How is this King of Spain important? Like, what was going on with this viceroy? And they were able to answer my questions and kind of dialogue with me about the things that were really important in the lesson in English, okay? And I at that point told them, you guys, I didn't teach any of that to you in English. Like that, we talked about that completely in Spanish. That's how much you understood. Even though you felt like you were so busy focusing on the language, you weren't picking up the culture. You really were picking up the culture. It was like, I snuck it in, right? And so at that point, they were like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. Like, I guess I was working really hard to understand, but I was understanding. So yeah, CI.